My mother and I were driving down the road to the woods so that we could take our puppy for a walk and then post some letters in the village. When we were coming back, it was just starting to get dark, but there was still a good deal of light, and I could see fine without my headlights on. The reference, I live on a hill in a very rural area, and as I was driving, I was coming towards my house, which is right on the bend of the road as you come up. There are 2 brick sheds on the left as you approach, which we use, which are across from the lane of my house. There is another lane that runs up the side of my house, which is straight on as you drive up the hill. I have to park a few yards away from my house due to the limited space. So when I come home, I turn right to pass my house, drive down to the barn, and turn around and then drive back up to park besides the road, so that my car is easier to get out of the space again. It's also important to note that these roads are very rarely used by anyone who isn't a neighbor, due to the fact that I live on a private estate, and neither of these roads actually lead anywhere. Anyway, I was driving up the hill with my mum, sitting with the dog in the back, as he's a puppy and we hadn't got a cage for my pa yet. I also had a bag full of logs in the boot for the wood stove. As we're coming up the hill, I see what I think is my stepdad walking from one of the sheds across the lane and to the house. When I see him, I mention to my mum that it might be better if she got out of the car right outside the house with the dog and ask my stepdad to take the logs out so that I don't have to carry it all the way up the lane to the house. But then, as we get to the house, we realize 2 things. 1, my stepdad's car is not parked outside the house where it usually is, nor is it parked anywhere else down the lane. And 2, we just saw my stepdad on the way home, finishing up some work he was doing for our landlord. So, who exactly was the person we just saw? As I'm driving down the lane to turn around and park as I usually do, I'm thinking about the person I saw, and am trying not to freak out. It was definitely a man. There was just something about his physique, tall and lanky, and the way he walked, kind of like a swagger, that just made it seem like it was a man and not a woman. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, so I couldn't see his face, as well as a pair of camouflage trousers. This is not the kind of thing my stepdad would wear, not least because he actually doesn't even own any clothes like that. He's also not lanky and doesn't swagger, so it clearly could not have been him. Anyway, we get parked and walk up to the house with the dog and the wood, and then come to the door. The door is unlocked. At this point, my mother is getting very anxious because even though she did not see the person, she's concerned because she definitely locked the door behind her. She's borderline paranoid about locking the door, even though we live in the back and beyond. So I believe she locked the door. So she thinks that we might have been mistaken, and for whatever reason my stepdad got a lift home from work and unlocked the door himself. She opens the door and calls out his name, but there's no answer. She hears a bang coming from upstairs that sounded like something was falling off the bed. She tells me to use my key to lock the door, because now it seems someone is actually in the house. I locked the door and ran over to the tool shed to grab a hammer or something. I couldn't find the light switch, so I just grabbed the Stanley knife on the table and ran back with it. My mum told me not to use it because I could get into trouble for using it on someone, even if they were burgling the house. But I was scared out of my wits and had read far too many creepy stories, so I kept it in my hand regardless. My mum phoned my stepdad and told him that there was someone in the house, and he effectively told her to stop panicking because it was unlikely. She explained that I saw someone walking out of our shed, and then she heard something upstairs. At first, he thought we had actually seen him, but he couldn't have returned by the time we got home because we passed him near our landlord's house as we were driving back. He said not to worry and that he would be back in a minute, and my mother hung up. As she unlocked the door, she told me to wait outside with the dog and that she would go investigate. I followed her inside with the wood and the dog and the knife and stood at the front of the stairs as she went to look up. I checked the cupboard and the corner of the dining area and found nothing. Once she came downstairs and found nothing, we relaxed a bit, or she did. I was still freaked out because I had no idea what I had just seen. I too went upstairs to double check. I looked under the beds and in the cupboards, but it was to no avail. I was still freaked out though. I definitely saw someone. So considering it wasn't my stepdad, there were only a few possibilities now. One of my neighbors came over, went into our shed and disappeared into thin air. That must be the case because they can't access it via their property on the road. I'd just driven down and saw nobody. Or our other neighbor's son who has schizophrenia. He used to be in the army and also wears camo sometimes, and he has a history of wandering around our neighbor's yard and following my neighbor around. Maybe he decided to go into our shed. This was later ruled out when my stepdad got back, because he told us that he knew my neighbor's son was now living in a home for the mentally ill just down the coast. Also, this neighbor's house is at the end of the same street I'd just driven down, so I would have seen him walking down the lane as I drove past to that neighbor's house, turned around and drove back up to park, and I didn't see him or anyone else for that matter. The only explanation is that someone came looking for my stepdad and then walked off somewhere we couldn't see. But I don't know, that'd be really weird. The only road used frequently is the one I drive down. The one other road, which was very rocky and unpaved, that leads to the barn, there's literally nothing at. So I don't know why anyone would go down there. Also, I could see right down this road when I was coming up the hill, and that person literally just disappeared behind my mum's car, where the front door is. As for the bang my mum heard, I honestly think that was just the cat jumping off my bed upstairs. But in the moment it was scary, because I'd also seen someone walking across the lane to the house, and the adrenaline was pumping. I really don't know what it was. I do know the figure was solid enough for me to think it was an actual person. I also know this isn't the first time we have seen and heard unexplainable things in our house. 2 days after we moved in, my mum and I both heard what sounded like my voice downstairs saying, "Oh, what?" And we both thought that the other had said it. I don't sound like my mum at all really, but when you hear a female voice, your brain kind of makes sense of it and assumes it's the only other person it could be, which in my case was my mum. It was only after I found out that it wasn't my mum that I thought back to the sound and realized it really sounded more like my own voice than hers. My mum has also seen a very solid looking cat, a totally different coloured one to R2, walking up to the door as if it was going to go out the cat flap, and then no cat flap sound. When she went to look, the cat was not there or outside, and both our cats were still upstairs. She's also seen a small white dog appear out of nowhere and seemingly disappear, and saw someone's arms pulling out the drawers of her dresser when she was outside looking into the bedroom window. She assumed it was my stepdad, only for him to tell her that he hadn't even got out of bed yet. What creeps me out about this one is that my stepdad's workmate has seen someone walking out of our shed before too. He came to pick him up for work one time and was waiting by the house when he saw what he thought was my stepdad come out of the shed, walk through the gates beside it, and disappear behind the building. When my stepdad then walked out of the house, he was obviously pretty surprised. I've had many encounters with ghosts, but this is the first time I've seen a solid apparition in this place. Considering that the house is probably about 400 to 500 years old, I guess it's not that weird. Plus, there's a story of a former resident who was a gameskeeper, having shot himself a few decades ago, which would explain some stuff, like maybe the camo trousers. I'm not sure, but I'm really freaked out.